It seemed that there could be something interesting in such an unfriendly and gloomy place as Mordor. Without exaggeration, the creations of Peter Jackson in all colors show us the realm of Sauron as a barren, scorched desert in which there is hardly anything worthy of the attention of the audience except the orcs and the Mount Doom. In fact, Mordor was not always so gloomy. The servants of Sauron didn't always live there. Moreover, this place has a history and even its own culture. This is what we see in the film from Amazon. In the first episodes, there is a completely different picture. Fertile green fields that are inhabited by humans. And if you carefully delve into the text of the professor, you can find out a lot of interesting facts about this part of Middle-earth. First, Mordor is almost completely surrounded by mountains. The main reason for complicating the journey of the Fellowship of the Ring to the Fatal Mountain is the giant mountains surrounding Mordor that form its northern and western and southern borders. Most likely, they were created by Melkor. He was a lover to fence off his estates from other people's views. Most likely, this territory was intended for the development of his future plans and was supposed to serve as a kind of springboard for training. Perhaps it was a refuge with the possibility of retreat, since the path to Mordor is open from the east. I think that when creating the mountain range surrounding Mordor, the experience of Angband played an important role. During the War of Wrath, the garrison of this stronghold even had nowhere to retreat, and it was not possible to save the remnants of the army. Second, Orodruin reacted to the presence of Sauron. Orodruin, translated from Sindarin, means a mountain of scarlet flame. This is the greatest volcano of Middle-earth, the fiery heart of Mordor. It was here in Orodruin, in a layer of fire, that Sauron forged the One Ring to rule Middle-earth, and accordingly only in this flame was it possible to destroy the ring. Orodruin was the reason why Sauron chose Mordor as his home in the Second Age. He knew that he could use the fire inside the volcano for his magic, and over time a bond developed between them. Every time Sauron returned to Mordor, the volcano erupted. This happened in the year 3429 of the Second Age, and from 2954 of the Third Age until the end of the War of the Ring. Flames were already continuously erupting from the mouth of Orodruin. Third, the meaning of the word Mordor. Although the elves hated this place with all their hearts, they still gave the name to the House of Sauron. Mordor in Sindarin means Black Land or Dark Land, and from Quenya, Mordor can be translated as a land of shadows, which also doesn't sound too happy. Of course, such an ominous name appeared for a reason, but contrary to various theories, it should be taken literally. The fact is that the appearance of Mordor was a consequence of numerous volcanic eruptions, and this was reflected in the landscape. The ground was covered with ashes and cinders, and the petrified lava flows didn't add beauty either. Melkor loved volcanoes to such an extent that he even created Thangarodrim, 3 huge volcanoes at the foot of which he built his huge fortress, Angband. And by the way, the Elvish words Mor and Dor are generally quite common in The Lord of the Rings. For example, the root of Mor is present in Moria, which means a black abyss, and Dor appears in Gondor, which means stone ground. 4. Sauron's Own Path. In the film trilogy, no attention was paid to the details of Mordor. The scriptwriters of the Peter Jackson's trilogy focused only on the main strategic points, showing panoramic shots of chaos, destruction, and the remains of plants that managed to survive in this dying country. So it is not surprising that due to the lack of Sauron as a real character in the films, many details related to his history were missed, such as the Road of Sauron. Sauron's road began at the Great Western Gate of the Barad-dûr, passed through a long iron bridge over a deep chasm, and then stretched 5 kilometers westward through the Gorgoroth. From the foot of the Mount Doom, the road of Sauron rose high up, covered with a path, and ended on the eastern slope of the Orodruin, at the entrance to the fiery chambers, where the One Ring was forged. It is believed that the Dark Lord used this path in his bodily incarnation, and therefore the road was preserved as a kind of tribute to memory. It was a wide path, covered with ash and rubble. It was often filled in and damaged by volcanic eruptions during the eruptions of the Mount Doom. But the orcs cleared and restored the road each time. Let's hope to see the construction of this structure in the future films from Amazon. 5. Minas Morgul. Minas Morgul, or Tower of Dark Magic, is perhaps the most majestic building in Mordor shown in the film. But once people lived there, or rather the king of Gondor Isildur himself. At that time, Minas Morgul was a beautiful city and was called Minas Ithil, or Tower of the Rising Moon. The moon bathed the courtyards in a silver glow, causing the walls to glow with white and silver light. Sauron had already tried to capture the eastern fort of Gondor, but for the first time the fortress was successfully defended. However, after the Great Plague, the population of Gondor was significantly reduced, and then the Nazgul, led by the Witch King of Angmar, attacked the city and captured it after long siege. Over time, Minas Ithil turned into a dark demonic fortress and received a new name. 6. Serith Angle. The fortress of Serith Angle was built by the Gondorians shortly after the War of the Lost Alliance, at the beginning of the Third Age. It was the Ithilians' eastern outpost, designed to watch Mordor, where the creatures of Sauron still hid. However, the tower was largely abandoned after the death of King Narmasil II, 29th King of Gondor, and its entire garrison perished in 1736 of the Third Age. When the vigilance of people weakened, the fortress was captured by the Witch King of Angmar, and the Tower of Serith Angle was filled with supporters of Sauron for many years. Serith Angle is translated as a spidery pass, because the spider Shelob lived here, which, by the way, settled here long before the coming of Sauron. For Sauron, the fortress was useful mainly because it prevented the escape of employees from Mordor, who worked only out of fear, and on the other hand, together with Minas Morgul and Shelob, Serith Angle reliably protected Mordor from secret invasions. 7. There were fertile lands in Mordor. You might think that Mordor is dull and grey, like Gandalf's suit, and from the Amazon series we already know what Mordor looked like before the events of the War of the Ring. But how did Sauron manage to maintain a huge army in this resource-strapped arid region during the events of the War of the Ring? The fact is that in film trilogy, we see only one of three parts of Mordor. Right behind the Black Gates is the Gorgoroth, where the most interesting events for the story of the films took place. It is here that the Mount Doom of Barad-dûr is located, and the blacksmiths in which the legions of Sauron are created. Sauron's army is almost completely occupied with the manufacture of weapons, and for the rest of the work, the Dark Lord captured people who lived near Mordor. To the southeast lies Leafland, a region covered with rock fragments, the result of endless eruptions, also not very suitable for agriculture. Nirn is the southernmost part of Mordor, where the Sea of Nirnen is located. The land was fertile enough to feed both Sauron's army and the slaves themselves. And although the ashes of Mount Doom are poured on Nur, this area is not without its charm. If you played in the Shadow of Mordor, then you probably remember the second location, which in comparison with the others looks much livelier and friendlier. 8. Own language. The people inhabiting Mordor had to communicate with each other, and we even heard some orc curses while watching movies. If we recall the theory about the region of the orcs, then that they were bred from the elves, then it seems quite logical that the adverb of the order is someone's borrowed distorted language. Sauron created the Black Speech during the Second Age in order to unite his army with the linguistic tradition of the orcs in particular. The Valyrian language of the Valar was taken as a basis, but this idea failed. After the War of the Lost Union, the dialect was forgotten by everyone except the Nazgul. However, some words were used later in the Orc dialect. The most striking example of the High Black dialect is of course the inscription on the One Ring. 9. Sauron ruled Mordor for much longer than we think. After watching Peter Jackson's films, People unfamiliar with the books could get the impression that the events described are happening for the first time. In fact, this is not the first attempt by Sauron to capture Middle-earth, and he has been invisibly present in it since the beginning of the creation of the world, how they try to show us in the series from the Amazon The Rings of Power. A small biography of Sauron from books. Once Sauron was Maiar, the same as Gandalf and Saruman, though not so kind. He was one of the first to defect to Melkor and became the most powerful and loyal of his servants. However, when Locke turned away from his master, Sauron hid until the free people of Middle-earth again lost their vigilance. Sauron settled in Mordor 1,000 years after the end of the First Age. After that, this area became the place of his evil will for the entire Second and Third eras of Middle-earth. For almost 2,500 years, Sauron continuously ruled Mordor. Soon after the creation of the One Ring, he went to war against the elves of Eregion but was defeated. After that, almost 1,000 years later, he began to attack and ravage the Númenórean harbors in Middle-earth until he was captured and brought to the infamous Númenor. Not without the participation of Sauron, Númenor was wiped off the face of the earth, and the rebellious Maiar lost his physical body. Immediately after the destruction of Númenor, Sauron went to Mordor as a spirit and, taking on a new guise, again began to rule Mordor, increasing his power and preparing for a further invasion. 10. Mordor was built by humans. Humans lived here and we know it. But what happened after the eruption of the Mount Doom? Most likely people left these lands and moved to neighboring lands, and almost all the buildings on the borders of the possession of the Dark Lord also belonged to people, and initially they served them in order to contain the forces of darkness and protect against the raids of Sauron's servants on Gondor. It's hard to believe, but humans have been side by side with Mordor for centuries, so by and large the appearance of orcs was not such news for them. However, then the plague broke out, which devastated the population of Gondor, and the garrisons holding back Mordor retreated, allowing Sauron to capture impregnable fortresses almost without loss. The plague ended only 2 centuries later, and humans were ready to return to the borders of Mordor. But by that time, all the strategic fortifications had already been captured and were teeming with orcs. And that's all I have. If you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and click on the bell. For me, your activity is the best reward. Thank you for your attention. See you soon. Bye.